So pretty amazing. I wonder if you knew that before you saw that video, that Saturn's rings were little chunks of ice floating around, orbiting the planet. Pretty beautiful too. Okay, let's move on. Moving on to Uranus. So smaller than Jupiter and Saturn, but much larger than the Earth. Also made of hydrogen and helium with a bit of other compounds like methane thrown in. But the really interesting thing about Uranus, I think, is that it's tilted by about 98 degrees. So it has this extreme axis tilt. And people think that, that it took multiple hits that sort of knocked it over, which is really quite amazing. And it has rings. So Saturn is not the only one to have rings. As we saw before, Jupiter actually has a small ring system. But Uranus has rings as well. They're not as big and beautiful as Saturn's rings, but they're the same kind of thing. Little rocks of ice, little ice crystals, and ice rocks, etc. And then there's Neptune, which is really a whole lot like Uranus, except for it's not tilted over. It also has many moons, including a big cloud-covered moon called Triton. And then there's poor little Pluto that got demoted. All right, well, there's a reason it got demoted. It's much smaller than the major planets. It's kind of icy and comet-like in its composition. We'll study comets and asteroids in the next couple of videos. Pluto's main moon, Charon, is of similar size. Now, why did it become what's called a dwarf planet? So a dwarf planet doesn't mean just small planet. It means that it's not really what we think of as, when we think of planets, they really should have come up with a different name. It's not just a small one, it's a different object, different kind of object. So dwarf planet really means a different kind of object. So what does it take to be a planet, and why doesn't Pluto qualify? Well, you have to pass three criteria, and one is you have to be round due to your own gravity. Well, that's true. Pluto's round, and it's big enough that it becomes round due to its own gravity. And we'll see when we study asteroids and comets that if you're not big enough, you don't end up being round. You might look like a potato or something. But it is round. Fine. Okay. It has to orbit the sun. Yes, it orbits the sun. Excellent. But it's the third criteria that's a little harder to understand, is why it got demoted to dwarf planet. And that is that it has to have cleared the neighborhood around its orbit. Okay, what does that mean? That means that no other bodies of comparable size can be hanging around. And you can see, actually, there's quite a bit more than this, too, of bodies that are roughly similar in size that are just sort of hanging out in that orbit. So it's just doesn't quite make that final criteria to be a planet. So it's demoted. Okay. Now here's a nice data table just for your reference. And it tells you all kinds of things. Number of moons, it doesn't have rings or not, its composition, the average surface temperature or cloud top temperature if it's a gas giant, its axis tilt, its rotation period, its orbital period, etc. Right? So lots of nice things here. The masses in terms of Earth masses, right? So 0.82 times the mass of Earth, of course. Earth is 1 times the mass of Earth. And then its radius in just kilometers. I wish they had put it in here in terms of Earth radii, but they didn't. But you can see the relative size here in this little diagram. Right, you can see Jupiter and Saturn are very similar in size, and Uranus and Neptune are very similar in size, and a lot smaller than these two guys, but a lot bigger than Earth. Okay, pause the video and answer the question.